Hey guys, so we're just gonna get this live stream going, so make sure it looks like it's working. So real quick before we get too deep into this thing, I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Can everybody hear me? Can you see my screen? Looks like it should be up. Awesome, cool. We're gonna jump in here and get into some pretty fun stuff this week. We're gonna be doing rendering, which is this and week four both. I think my two favorite weeks of the month. Not that the other two were bad. It's just a lot of like prep work and kind of technical stuff we had to go through. Now that you guys have RenderBand going, we can kind of finally get into some of the more fun and pretty stuff like lighting, colors, adding different moods and stories to your shots. So it should be pretty cool. Now the rendering process is a little tricky, especially because obviously you're still very new to doing this. So we're gonna go through a couple like tips and things, and hopefully you guys have already done from the last activity. But I want to review a few things that are very important from 3.1, and then we're going to jump into 3.3. And I'm not going to go through the entire activity, but I think what I'm going to do for this one is we'll maybe do a demo on the day illumination and just explain like the process of matching one of the reference images. So I'm providing you, by the way, with like reference, and your goal really is to just follow the instructions, see how close you can get, and really, as long as you load the image in, rotate it the right way, all you're doing is watching how the sun is kind of turning in relation to the building, and eventually you're going to get the shadows to line up, and it should look extremely similar to the reference. And then you produce your nice high quality render, save it out, and then you have one done. And you're repeating that a couple times through here. So the day, the sunrise, they're all basically the same. It's look at the reference, how close can you get by loading in the image and rotating the sky until it matches. The night one's a little more complicated because we do have an extra light source for this one to get that sort of stylized white moonlight coming from the top right. So we'll probably cover this one together as well. And the really fun one that I enjoy the most is going to be the last part. So this is the one where I want you guys just to have fun. You don't have to match reference for this. I'm giving you reference images for the ones I did, but you don't have to necessarily match those. They're just examples of different setups I've had. But you can totally make your own setup as long as you're, uh, you know, creating maybe at least like two or three different lights and just experimenting with interior illumination because you guys have opened the shutters, trying different colors out. I'm not looking for some masterpiece. I just want you guys to experiment, have fun, and just see what you can kind of come up with on your own. Yeah, so the burn-in mapping thing, you do have to have that on pretty much every time. So when you turn it on, it will stay on until you close out of the image tool. So as soon as you close out of that window or close out of Maya, the next time you open it, it'll be turned off again, and then you have to turn it back on. It's just a checkbox, but it's kind of annoying. You have to like watch out for that every single time. Pretty soon, like once you guys do this enough, it's not going to be something you really think about. You just sort of do it on autopilot. It's like every time you save, it's always just make sure it's turned on, then save the image, you're good. Yeah, it's not a big deal. I mean, I can still fix it on my end, even if it is saved out incorrectly, so it doesn't really prevent me from grading anything. So it's not like an issue or anything. I just want to make sure for your own personal work, if you guys get to the point where you want to post some of these images on like eventually you're going to have like a website for your portfolio. You might want to share images with like your family and friends and show them what you're working on. Having that turned on just means that they see the exact same image you had inside of Maya. Because if it isn't turned on, it just means the renders will be kind of dark and it's not like 100% accurate. Oh, is it windy? That might be the fan. Hold on, let me try this. All right, I just turned the fan off. Does that sound any different? I had a fan blowing behind me, and that might have been being picked up by the microphone. Okay, that's my bad. I didn't even know that was going to be picked up. All right, so let's jump in here and do some of this stuff. All right, so I've got Maya open, And so basically the way this activity works is it's kind of like the other ones where you're always building off something you've done previously. So obviously, download the files, watch all the videos in 3.3. You'll be watching this live session and probably, coming back to this later for some extra information. Um, Now we're going to want to move the downloaded images into the source images folder. And so remember how you guys set up your full Maya project folder before, and I've had you putting your Maya files in the scenes folder. This is kind of the same thing where um, you're trying to keep images that we're using in Maya also in the project folder. This is going to a different one though called source images. So I'll run through an example of that. So I'm just going to click on the download and let that go. And I'll show you where we're supposed to put this. But this is what we're doing right here is something you're going to be doing a lot when you get to shading and lighting 2, because in shading and lighting 2, you guys are going to be making some of your own textures. We're going to talk about materials like finding wood images online, then putting it on a surface. So when you do create your render, the material and the object looks like it's wood. It's not just like gray. So once we start getting into textures in that class, it's a very, very similar process to this. So we're just going to right click and extract all and then get that out of the zip file. We can now delete that. And then what we're going to do, I think it's this guy. Pardon my messy desktop. It's just filled with screenshots from my grading earlier. Okay, so in the environment project, this is where you guys have been keeping your Maya files. And I know I have a bunch of extra ones here just because I have other versions that I've been doing. But you have your Maya files in here. In source images, this is where the HDR images go. And you can see here that I already have a bunch inside of it. What I'm going to do is remove some of these. And in the download folder, I also have my example renders. So this is where you're going to find like your reference for like the day illumination. There's the night, that's sunrise. And then back here, I've got the different bonus renders. So this one's just kind of like a nice, more of like a pale white exterior lighting coming from the top, really bright, strong backlighting behind the telescope. So kind of a slightly different variation of that, but the same colors. And these two here were just me playing around with different like lights and intensities and colors and just, having fun. Okay. Those you don't have to put in the source images folder. You can if you want. These you can just keep wherever you're keeping any of your reference images for your classes. What I want to do is I'm actually going to remove a couple things because you guys don't know what these .text things are yet. So let me just really quickly delete those, because when you move these images into the source images folder, they don't have that little .text version that you just saw a second ago. I'm going to talk about that when we render it. That's something that gets created automatically in Maya when you start rendering with these images. If your PNG opens in Photoshop, then that means for some reason it's defaulting to that software. That kind of happens from time to time where you're trying to open something and for whatever reason your laptop thinks it's supposed to be opened in one specific software when it shouldn't be. If you right click and go down to open with, mine opens with Photos, I believe. Yeah, this is Photos. And if you do open with, you'll probably see it on the list, but I think if you do choose another app right here, when you find Photos up here or in your list, and you should have this on Windows, it comes with the operating system. Hit that little checkbox right there to say always open this app or always use this app to open PNG files and hit OK. That should cause all of your PNG images to now begin opening with the photo app instead of Photoshop. I mean, you can still use Photoshop. It's not a huge deal, but that's a pretty big program just to look at an image. So again, it is open with, just pick it there, or choose the app, and then turn that checkbox on to force all PNG formats to always open with Photos. That should get around the issue. Okay. So I've moved all my images over, so they're in the source images folder. And then what I'm going to do is go back into Maya, and we're going to first, let's just set the project right off the bat. So I'm going to do File, Set Project, Okay, here's my project window. Let's just find my project's on the desktop in this case, but I know you guys are probably keeping it like your documents folder. So desktop, we're going to do, yep, here it is right here. So environment project, set, open. And I'm going to pick the environment challenge because I think this is the same one we did before, although the date doesn't look right. Well, we'll find out what it is. Hopefully this has the telescope in it. Yep. Okay, that's perfect. Yeah, it has a telescope. Now I do have this issue right here. This is going to be kind of important for you guys. I know I've talked about this before in a couple different videos, and I think we even went over it last week in the live session. But if you guys get in your scene, because you are going to probably be adding some interior illumination, you want to be able to see through this little black color right here. So in your perspective camera, so I'm looking through perspective right now, not my other camera. Just go to shading at the top of the viewport and then do backface culling on. And that will allow you to see into the interior just in case you want to like be able to like see a light and move it around without having to put the camera physically inside, beyond that black wall. So it's right there. Okay. Now at the moment, I've got two different cameras. I think for this is the same one I used in my example images. I might change it up, I think, for this one. Let's do something a little bit different. I think this one's probably locked. I'm going to move this one. Let's do something maybe like this, where I'm pushed in a little closer, like that. And I'm going to lock it down like we've done before. I'm going to take the telescope and just try to move this forward a little bit. Let's move it back that way. So I'm just trying to move it away from like the balcony archway, just so it stands out a bit more, maybe like this, and that'll probably work. Okay, so I have like what I think I want to have as my starting point, and you guys don't have to match the camera compositions. If you guys have different cameras and different positions, that's totally fine. The only really thing I'd recommend is, since you guys are trying to match reference, I wouldn't use any of your cameras that are drastically different than the position. Just because like when you're looking at shadows, like if your camera can't even see, the side of the balcony or any of this stuff, like it's going to be really hard for you to line this up because your camera's not, actually looking at it. So I would at least try to find something that sees most of this information. And you can always, move your cameras from before. Don't feel like it has to be the exact same cameras that you used last time. You have complete creative freedom to do that. And I think what I might do as well for this one, because I always do the same resolution, is I'm going to change mine to a widescreen format just for the sake of the lecture. And you guys don't have to do this. I just want to change it up because I've been using the same setup for months. All right, we're going to do a widescreen so I get both windows, and it should allow me to see a bit more on the right side so I can see that shadow right there. Let's try locking that again. Okay. So we're all good with that. I think we can finally do this. Now, one of the keys that we're going to need to do here is making sure that we can always see the reference. This is where it gets a little tricky. Now, I have a second monitor. You guys can't see that, obviously, in the live stream. But if you have like a second monitor, you can just throw the reference off on the second monitor somewhere, and that'll make it a little easier for you. But if you don't have a second monitor, we need to try to squeeze this in the view so I can see it along with Maya. So I'm going to scale that down quite a bit, put it to the side, open up Maya, hit that button in the top right just to minimize it a little bit. And I'm just going to try to bring that in just enough so I can see the image as my reference, and I can still access all the information inside of Maya. Okay. Now I'm also going to do a split view. You'll see why in just a little bit. So split view gives me the two viewports. And I'm going to make this perspective. This is going to be my camera that we're going to use. You can see how we're already getting pretty tight. Now if I collapse the outliner, that will give me a little more space to maybe work with. But if I want to see the full image, I really have to scale this out quite a bit. Now, if I have the attribute editor open as well, because we might be needing to access some different attributes, that's also going to eat into it. But if these are all also collapsed, that helps me out a little bit as well. So I could have it open like this with none of these open, and it's just the view, the perspective view, and the other camera. So depending on like what things are open in your interface, that will kind of determine how you rearrange the panels just so you can properly see everything. So I'll let you guys kind of figure that out on your own once you get in there. But don't be afraid to like hide things if you need to make more space so you can see the render and still move around in perspective view. Okay, so what we're going to do is first, let's make our first light. So we're going to come down here, and we're already at the first part. We've already done all this stuff. We opened Maya, we opened the file, we got all the images moved over. We're going to try doing the very first one. So we've got the image open. Now it's telling us what lights are used. This is a Pixar dome light using the San Giuseppe Bridge 4K.HDR. And we're going to just try to match the lighting quality from the reference, meaning like the intensity, the light angle that the sun's coming from. The shadows should be pretty much the same. And then as soon as we get that right, we just make a high quality render, save it out, and then we're done with the first one. And you can see here I have my little note about like adjusting samples, making sure the burn and mapping on save thing is turned on. That way the render is not coming out too dark. And then once we know we're good, we're also going to make a display layer for the light, and that way we can turn it off and move on to the next step. And the reason I'm kind of talking about the display layer thing is because when you guys start going through your different lights, I don't want you to ever lose the previous one. So like, let's say you do a really good job with the day illumination, and then you delete it, and then move on to the next one. What's going to happen is if you ever need to go back to this, you have to sort of restart it. So I'm hoping what we can do by keeping the lights in the scene and using display layers, when you're done with something, you're just going to hide it so you don't really ever lose it. And if you need to go back to it, we just unhide that light, make a couple adjustments, save it out again. So we're trying to be non-destructive and not really ever delete anything that we're working on if we can avoid it. So let's make our first light source. Yes, right. The fast way to lock the camera is going to be that we'll lock at the top here. So when I'm looking through this camera, I'm just going to hit that button, turn it on. That locks the cameras, so you can see it. It locks the translate and rotate. So you can see this button right here locks and unlocks everything instead of me going through this and right-clicking and doing it that way. I think in the video playlist I do it this way. And I know a bunch of you are doing it that way as well, but I would encourage you to use the one on the top of the viewport instead, since it's a little bit faster. Okay, let's make our light. So what we have to do is first make the Pixar dome light. Now, as long as you're on the RenderMan shelf, you're gonna have all these different buttons here. This is the one you guys were using for the image tool, and these are all sort of related to the image tool. And here in this little section, we have our lights. And any of the icons that have the little triangle in the corner, those are ones that you can right click on. Now, when you right click on like the first one, you'll see there are, these are called direct lights. These are all different direct lights we can make, like a rectangular shaped light source, one that's shaped like a disc. A distant is sort of a unique one that's used for like to mimic sunlight. I don't use this one very often, but there's that guy. A spherical shaped light source, one that's shaped like a cylinder. So these are really just like your primitive shapes that cast illumination into some different direction. We're going to be doing this a little bit this week, but these guys are going to pop up a lot more in week 4 when you get to the character activity. The next button over, this is where we get into the lights we're using for this one. So we have, if I right click, we have a Pixar dome light, Pixar portal light, and then the Pixar environment daylight. Now, with these guys right here, we're not going to be using them. I think I might talk about this one a little bit in one of the videos, but we're going to be primarily focusing on just the dome light. And you can see here, because I did that split view, for some reason it reset that back to this being turned off. So let me just turn that back on again so I can see through the black. And we're going to right click, and I'm going to pick the first option in the list, Pixar dome light. And I want you to see what this looks like. So we're just going to click. Now, when you make your light source, this is what it looks like. It's completely white. And if you back up the camera far enough, you'll see what this is doing. This is currently what the light source looks like. You do not have to move your camera just like the reference. Yep, you can still use your previous cameras if you want. So I'm not grading you on your cameras at all. This is just the lighting. Only move the cameras if you think it's going to make it easier for you to match the lighting. That's completely up to you though. But I want you to see what the Pixar dome light looks like. It is a giant white ball. So currently, if I render it, this is not going to look very exciting. So in this camera, let's see what this looks like. So let's just bring this in a little bit so I can see the full shot, like right there. There we go. I'm going to hit R, and let's just let it do its thing. Okay, you can see that this is our render. It's incredibly boring. There's no color. It's like a very even gray tone everywhere. That's because the light source thinks it is solid white coming from every single angle. That's not how sky is supposed to work. So that's why we're getting the look that we're getting. So now what we want to do is load, I'm just turning the render off again. So remember, this little R button is going to start the viewport render and then use it to turn off the viewport render. One quick thing here, which I'm pretty sure most of you guys did do because it was part of 3.1. Did everybody remember to change this, the percentage? I don't know if you guys noticed how much of a difference this made if you were testing it out before you did it. But this guy right here, if you still have it at 100%, this is going to make your renders a lot slower. So if I do have it at 100%, if you have not changed this, and this is the third button over on the top of the viewport, when you render it, see how slow this is? Now it definitely has more detail, like it's a sharper image, but it takes so long to calculate. And that defeats the purpose of using the viewport render, because the whole reason we're doing this is because we're trying to get very quick feedback for what the render is eventually going to look like. We shouldn't be waiting for this long cleanup process just to see if a light's color is the right tone. So by keeping this set to 50%, look how much faster this thing chews through the image. So 50% is going to be roughly about 4 times as quick as it's set to 100%. So it's very, very important that you guys have it set to 50%. And the other big one too, which was also part of 3.1, but I just want to double check to make sure you guys have done this, is in the Maya preferences down under render ban. Make sure that you have changed the render threads from -2 to -6. Most of you have probably done it because again, that was part of the last assignment. I wasn't grading for it looking for this in your scene, but that is something you should be doing. And you don't have to do this every time you open Maya. You just do it once, and as long as you don't delete Maya, it should be set like this forever. But this has a big impact on how fast your computer responds when the render is running, because the render takes up a lot of space, and if you have it turned on and you haven't changed that, you'll notice it doing other things like opening up Chrome and listening to stuff on Spotify, going into Photoshop. All those other tasks will really slow down, and it's going to basically make your laptop almost unusable while it's rendering. If you guys have questions about any of that, you can kind of hit me up on Discord and I'll talk to you one-on-one about it. But let's keep going. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off. We are going to load in the first image. Okay, so it says we want to load in San Giuseppe Bridge, and then we're going to try to match the light angle. So to load in your image, it's really easy. This is kind of why I have the perspective view open as well. But if you click on the light, and you can also do this through the outliner, by the way, because it does show up in here. I mean, that's the light source. But make sure you have your light selected that we just made, and go over to the attribute editor. You can see all the settings for the light, right? Intensity, exposure is kind of like intensity, the color of the light, some other things, like how rich it is, the saturation. The only thing we're concerned about right now is this thing called color map. This is where we're loading in the image for the light source. So on the little folder button to the right, you just hit it. It's going to open up a new open window, and you should be noticing that it's supposed to default at the right directory. Now, for some reason, mine, even though I set the project, it's looking in the wrong spot. So it's not a big deal. I'm just going to go back to the desktop. We're going to go back into the project folder, and I'm going to go into source images. Now, once we're in the source images folder, this is where we can pick the correct image. So in this case, we want to do San Giuseppe Bridge 4K. The external hard drive is totally up to you. I don't have mine connected all the time. I use mine for mainly backup. Mine's at the office right now, but when I go there to work, occasionally what I'll do is when I download a lot of projects or things, if I need to move them, I'll just quickly connect my drive for like half hour, transfer files over so I have like a nice backup, and then I disconnect it again. But yeah, I definitely would use the external hard drive, but it's not something you would typically leave connected all the time. Because you don't really want to work off the drive because it's connected through USB. There's a little bit of a lag if your project is on the drive, and that's what you're working from the whole time. Now, since I do have it loaded in, I think what's going to be kind of helpful is I may want to name this thing immediately. I don't know if I mentioned that in here. I don't. So I don't tell you guys to name the light source, but since you're doing different lights for the whole project, it's probably a good idea to label it. That way you can keep track of which one is which. So I'm just going to really quickly rename this in the outliner to day, just so I'm aware that later on, if I need to find it, this is the one that's doing my day illumination. And you can kind of see what it looks like. Like imagine if we're inside of it right here, because this is kind of roughly where the camera is. You can sort of see from inside what it looks like. So you have this like full world around you, like all these little buildings. There's the sun way back there, blue sky, right? Kind of cool. Now the way this thing works is when you render with an HDR image connected, and HDR, by the way, stands for high dynamic range. When you render with this, instead of it being just like a white color from everywhere, it means that well, actually, let's just render it so you can see it. I'm just going to get out of the attribute editor for a moment because we don't really need this once we've loaded it in. Let me just show you what this is doing. So got that closed. Here's my render. We're going to hit R and give it a moment. It's not going to look right yet, but watch down here at the bottom where it has that little warning. You're going to see it kind of click in a second, and you'll see the render changes. Just give it one moment. There it is. It clicked. Okay. There's a little error down here, but you can ignore that. I think I have something it messed up in my version of Maya, but you'll notice that something just changed out of nowhere, and very quickly before this little error popped up, what it said was there is a new texture that was created. And I want to show you guys what just happened. If I go back in the source images folder, look what's here. Remember earlier when I was in here and I deleted all those .text files? Because you guys haven't seen those yet. Notice how when I rendered, after a few seconds, or maybe like 20, 30 seconds, it clicked over, the lighting changed, and all of a sudden in here, there's this new image that looks like the same thing, has the same name, but at the end it says .text. So a text file is a texture file. This is going to get created every time you render with a new image. This is the format that RenderMan's using in your scene. So it'll load this in at first, but it's going to try to convert it to this other format. That way it works better for the render. You don't have to really think too much about this. It's not really anything you have to worry about. I just want you to understand what's happening. This is something that's going on kind of behind the scenes. You load an image in, RenderMan converts it to a format it likes, and then as soon as it converts it over, you're good to go. It works. So it's already doing what it needs to do. And you can notice like that every time I will move around or click on something, the render tries to restart. Now currently the render doesn't look anything like the reference. We're getting a lot of red. And it would kind of make sense because if you think about it, well, what light is hitting that part of the building? Just think about what's behind the camera. Like what is hitting the building? It's this stuff. Like you have these massive buildings behind us that are getting hit with the sun. They're kind of an orange color, and that bounce light is what's bouncing back towards us and then hitting this stuff. So we're getting a lot of orange bounce light from this. But the reason why we have this set up with the perspective view is because if you simply use E, so E is our rotate, and we start spinning the light, eventually we're going to get it so the sunlight is behind the camera hitting the wall, and we're going to get those same shadows right there. Now you want to be careful when you rotate this because you don't want to do anything weird like this. And I'm sure you guys just by looking at this will kind of know why you shouldn't do this. But why do you think that we shouldn't be doing this? I mean, you can rotate the light like that. Like you can tell it's changing stuff. I'm not saying it doesn't look cool. Like you're going to get a different type of image, but can you think of any reason why you probably would not want to do something like this, where you're just like spinning the light around at that angle? Because again, in my, you can technically do anything you want. There's nothing stopping you from doing this. But I'm sure you can imagine that's probably not good. Yeah, it's sort of like when you just think about um, and I think everyone does this because you don't really think about it. It's just like you realize, oh, I can rotate it. You start spinning it and flipping it around, and it does render. I mean, you're still going to get an image, but the problem is when you think about how the sun arcs up over above us, it has a very specific path. Like the ground is always the ground. The horizon's the same. Buildings stand vertically around us. You know, we don't. When you do this, you are completely changing the way the sun arcs across the sky. You're now saying the ground is almost vertical behind the camera, and then back this way is just open space. So it completely breaks the way that lighting is supposed to work in the real world. I mean, really, what is kind of happening? It's almost like saying the building has tipped over on its side, and it's like facing up towards the sky, like it's a demolished building looking upwards. We don't want to do any of that. So what I want to do is make sure the channel box, I'm just going to reset all this to 0 again just to fix it. So I'm just resetting rotation. Let's go back. We're going to do only rotate Y. So rotate Y is just spinning it around, but it's not tilting the world or doing anything weird like that. So we're just going to spin it. And eventually, because you can see the sun's right there, notice how the sun is hitting the front of the building. That's why we're getting those really cool shadows right there. If you keep turning it, eventually you will see the sun does appear. I'm just spinning it around, and it's coming from the left, and in a second here, you're probably going to see some sunlight. Yeah, and I think by tilting it, you can kind of get something probably close. But I think by doing just rotate Y, it'll probably make it a lot easier for you. Now you can see like even right here, the sun's like over here somewhere. It is already kind of working, but if I have to like nitpick this a little bit, and I know the camera's a little different, what do you guys see that is different? Like imagine like you're the instructor or you're looking at another student's project and you're trying to critique it. He's like asking for help. What do we see that's different? And I know the grain is an issue. We'll clean that up later when we do the final render. But what do you see that's different with the lighting? And I'll give you guys just a second to think about that. Because this is basically what I do when I open up your projects. Like I'm looking at your render and trying to figure out like, okay, so you got all the technical things working. Now, visually, what is off? Because we've done everything right, but what do we see that's different with the way the sun is hitting the building? Yeah, you're totally right, Alicia. It's really just coming down to like it's not the right angle at this point, right? It's still just a little bit off. So what I see is like over here on the right, see how that shadow crosses over past that railing right there? Yeah, it all comes down to shadows. Yeah, and it's also fainter. And so I think that's what you might be talking about, Elijah, is that it's like it's not as intense, right? It's a little paler. This feels a little bit brighter. So why is that? It's all coming from the same thing because if we spin the light around farther, it's going to reduce how far the shadow extends over from the side. And by pushing the sun around so it's hitting the building more directly, that's also going to give us more direct illumination, which will brighten up the render. So if I keep spinning it, and I'll show you guys a trick actually. So watch this. Let's say that you guys are trying to render only the shadow. This is a little tricky, but you guys will get the hang of this. There's a crop button right here that you can use to render a part of the render, not the whole viewport. So it'll take a little bit for you guys to get used to this, but if you hit crop, which is the fourth button over, it's going to turn on, define a crop window. I'm going to marquee drag over this. So just the part of the resolution gate where I see that shadow, I'm going to release. And see how the render is now updating in that little cropped region? Now, because the button's still on, if you click, see how it wants me to keep drawing a new regional area to render? This is really handy, by the way, when you have a full image and you're only like, let's say I'm only looking at the telescope. I don't care about the rest of the scene. I can draw a crop over the telescope and get way faster feedback. And then obviously I can just tap off of it. It'll go back to the full image. But if I do a crop here, I'm going to draw it again. So I'm just drawing my crop by left click and then dragging to do a little marquee selection of this area. And then I'm going to turn the button off. Now, by turning the button off, it doesn't remove the crop. It just means every time I click, it's not going to keep drawing a new crop window, because that does get very annoying when this is on and you keep messing up the crop you had before. So we're just turning it off. Oh, it's way clearer, because before it was trying to process the whole image and it just takes so much time. But because now it's able to refine a smaller area, you get way quicker feedback because it's able to get to that final point much quicker, which is obviously, a good thing. Now, if I keep rotating it, I'm just going to watch this one section. Okay, so let's just kind of lightly tap. That's actually not that far off. It's kind of hard to see how much that shadow goes past the railing in the reference, but maybe we'll just say like this feels pretty good, so it kind of dies right at the edge of the railing. Now, once I think I have it pretty good, I'm going to hit crop again, and I'm just going to draw a crop window over the whole resolution gate. Because the reason I'm doing that, by the way, is remember how the resolution gate, it was adding this like gray color around everything? And the gray color, like this whole area outside of it, this isn't anything that you're going to see in the final render. So I'm basically keeping this on. That way, every time I render it, it's only going to render literally what you'd see in the final. It's not wasting any time doing this other stuff. And I think the camera may have moved because it looks like it's kind of offset. Let me just turn the render on and off again. Yeah, that was weird. I don't know what just happened there for a second, but let's try that one more time. Just starting it again, crop. And I think at this point right here, if I just let it go for a little bit, like I would feel pretty comfortable saying that this is probably a good match. Now it does look a little different because you can see I'm getting a lot more red right here, but I think there is red right there. And probably if I did like a final render in the image tool, this would be close enough where I could probably turn it in. So I can tell you right now though, because I try to keep these relatively simple for the first couple, I'm not expecting you guys to go into the light source and like play around with the intensity and the exposure and the saturation. I just want you to load the light in. All you're doing is rotating it. As long as you get the rotate correct, it will naturally line up because that's all I did for the reference. I didn't do any other color adjustments, so it should be really easy for you guys to line it up. We'll get into the much more complicated color stuff farther down here. This is just the easy part. So it's pretty cool though, right? Like and we're producing a really nice render. And it's kind of the benefit too of using the HDR image is because now when you light something with these, because you'll be using these a lot, by the way, in tons of your own personal projects, is you get ranges of color. You get brighter colors from the sun. You'll get buildings that are bouncing light. The little ravine, the canal here, that's technically bouncing up like this kind of greenish turquoise color from below. It's probably not hitting it very much because of the ground, but that's coming here. Like everything you see in the image, even the trees, are contributing some amount of color to the render. So you get these really nice like variations of tone across the entire image. So it's such an easy way to get really beautiful images without very much work. Okay, so I think we're good. Let's turn that off. We're going to say that we have got through one of the images. So what I'm going to do is let's kind of skip down here to make the display layer. So we're going to make sure we add the light to it. That way we can turn it off when we're done with it. And we're going to do the final render and then move on to the night shot before we get out of here. So how do we do the display layer? It's just like what you guys did before with the character backgrounds. Remember how when you did the character stuff, I had you guys making those little polyplanes and then assigning them to a layer, and then you were like, you're able to turn them all on and off? Okay, so that is actually a very good question. So can we use any image? Why are we using high dynamic range? Okay, I talked about it in one of the videos, and I'll let you guys watch that for a lot more detail. But there is a reason we're doing this because I'm sure you can imagine, like, I could go online and just do a search for like sky image, find some image of a sky. Like, could I save this, put it in the source images folder, and then use it? Yes, you could. You could totally do that. It's not going to look good though, I can tell you that. HDR images, if you do a search for them, you'll see they look a little. No, that's not it. Let's do HDR Angular. Okay, this is how they're created, and I bet you guys have probably seen this thing before. Like if you guys ever watch like those behind the scenes for like feature films, this may have popped up at some point. And this is how they make these guys. It's basically just a photographer that's with a camera that takes a picture of a chrome ball that reflects the environment around it. So they use them on set to like get a really good image of like the environment that the actors are in. So that way, when they need to recreate something with CGI, they have a extremely accurate image of exactly the lighting conditions on that location, like the sky, the sun, the buildings, everything. It's all very, very accurate. But this whole like circular or spherical image, it's like that because when you take the angular map, it's then sort of unwrapped into this spherical map. So imagine like taking like that curved ball image and sort of like flattening it out to like a rectangular 2D image. That's basically what's happening. This is the image you guys are seeing currently in the scene. So you can still find these like if you search for them, but you can tell this looks a lot different than your typical sky image. Like see how it's all distorted. It's distorted like that because when you put this image on that spherical shape in Maya, it ends up looking correct again. So it kind of comes down to like how does the image have to look in order for it to wrap around that spherical shape and still look correct in the 3D software. I hope I'm explaining that correctly so you guys understand what I'm talking about. But that's sort of the evolution of how you get from point A to point B. Photographer taking a picture of a chrome ball has a little spherical reflection, unwraps it to this guy. There's a little bit more involved in that, but then this guy is then brought into Maya as the map. It's used, and we're good to go. But the other important thing too about these HDR images is with normal images, it's only black to white. Like black to white is also 0 to 1, so they're just numbers. Like JPEGs and PNGs only go to the number 1. But the HDR image and why it's called high dynamic range means the top end of the values of an HDR image are way above 1. So that really bright patch right there where the sun's located is way stronger than white. This is a super white color. That's why the sun looks so much brighter than everything else around it. So it has a higher range of colors and values on top of the fact that the image is also mapped a certain way so it looks correct on the sphere. So I'll let you guys check that out like when you watch the video in the playlist, but that's kind of a really quick crash course on why we're using these. We'll be doing these quite a bit next month as well. Yeah, they're super cool. Okay, let's do the final render, and I'll show you guys how we do this. So I have the light pretty much all set. I have the render turned off now because I'm kind of done with that. Over here, we're going to have the light selected. I'm going to hit that display layer button just like we did before last week. We're going to make a new layer with the selected object, which is our light in this case. And you can see if I turn the V off, see how it just hides and unhides the light? So exact same thing as before. We're going to double click. I'm going to call this day layer or day illumination, whatever you want to call it. And now I know later on, if I ever need to come back to it, I just turn this layer on, turn the other layer off. So everything's going to be organized. And of course, you guys can I know you were all color coding everything previously. You can totally go in there and give it a color that kind of matches the color of the light. That's up to you. So there's our day layer. I like it. So let's do the final render. Now this is where it's a little tricky because I have 2 different viewports. Be careful because depending on which one of these you clicked in last determines which one it's going to render over here. So when I hit the R button, it's going to launch the image tool. And I'm not going to wait for this, by the way, because it's going to take way too long for the live session. But you can see this is what it's doing. Now, obviously, when you see this, I think most of you would understand what probably happened. Like, that doesn't look right. it's rendering from the perspective camera. So I don't need to wait for this. I'm just going to hit cancel. I can even click on the image over here and just hit backspace to delete it. Let's just minimize this for a moment. I'm going to click on this side. I usually do it at the top, so I'm not clicking on an object. But either way, click over here somewhere, hit the button again. You can click back here to load up the image tool, because it's just another thing outside of Maya. Here it is, and now it's just a waiting game. And you guys saw from before, like, these don't happen instantly. These take a while to process. And this is a fairly simple one too. Like when you start getting into like color files and normal maps and reflections and there's glass windows that the light has to pass through. There's all these other variables that we haven't even got to yet that kind of add more render time. And when I was going through and kind of learning about this stuff, like when I was still a student, one of the things that kind of blew my mind was for the Chronicles of Narnia. There was a couple images in that scene when they're doing fur for one of the characters, and to get the shadows for the fur to look right, they're rendering this thing called a shadow pass, which is sort of like this other image that just shows like really fine, like high quality shadows in between things. It's also called occlusion, but they're doing these shadow passes to help the fur look correct for the final movie. And I was reading that every frame for the shadows of this fur was taking about 99 hours. And that's 99 hours to render one frame. And remember, when you're viewing a movie, it's typically 24 frames in a second. So imagine 99 hours, 24 times to do 1 second of just this one chunk of CG for fur. And you start to wonder how they ever do these movies. And so that's where they get into render farms and all these other, basically just like a giant cold room with servers that do nothing but calculate like images. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Some of you guys will end up doing that. We have a lot of students that will end up probably going to a studio, and if you really get into like lighting and rendering and doing this stuff, one of your first jobs might be managing a render farm where you literally set up like projects that other artists do to render, and you help debug stuff, manage render times, gather images. Like that's a whole part of the pipeline that you guys probably didn't even know about. But there is a little section in there where there are people that handle the process of making these images and then delivering it to the next step and making sure it all works. Typically, it goes to the compositor, so he can then build a comp for the final movie video or sequence that then eventually goes to editing and all this other stuff. Yeah, so it's a good question. So what do we do for the samples? Because obviously this is only at 9%, and it's going to take a little bit. So let me just cancel this real quick. I'm going to give you guys the cheat sheet here for samples. Here's what I want you to do. And I don't expect you guys to like really think too hard about what all this stuff means. I just want you guys to use these numbers and just get it set up and not worry about it again. Okay, so in the render settings, go to the RenderMan tab. And then yours are probably going to look kind of similar to this. They change things a little bit every release of RenderMan, but for the most part, it's the same. So we have min, max, pixel variants. We have a couple other max samples down here. And then down under path tracer, you can see there's a whole other section where we have more samples. Now, when you open the project up for the first time, I think yours might look like this. What you want to do is change the max samples here to 256. And then down here, I want you to change the light samples to 4 and indirect samples to 4. So the max samples is going to control the overall quality. So in every pixel in here, there's potentially up to 256 calculations in that one square, trying to figure out what the light looks like what's the color, where is it bouncing from, what part of the HDR image is it using, what's the texture of the surface around it. There's 256 of those in one square. Now, this is a pretty good number for all the renders you're doing this month. These guys are very important because these are specifically used to control the lighting, which is, big shock, exactly what we're doing today. So of course that's important. And indirect is bounced light. So when light comes in, it just doesn't hit something like a straight line and stop. You guys know how light bounces around everywhere, right? It comes in you might have the sun come down and hit like the top of the railing and then bounce against the wall. Or it comes here, maybe it hits like a stucco texture on the wall, and then it picks up that stucco texture, bounces that down to the telescope. That color now blends into the telescope's metal, and then that bounces over here. So light wants to bounce around. This is what's helping control the bounced light. So as long as you guys use what you're seeing here, 0, 256, and then 4 and 4, you can just use that for all your renders for this activity, and even for the stuff in week 4, and you're going to be all set. We'll talk more about this when you get into shading and lighting too. If you guys are interested in more math and numbers, I'm more than happy to talk to you guys about what this stuff means, but it's a lot to worry about in your first Maya class. So I tried not to get too deep into this thing because you're trying to do the fun stuff. You don't need to be worrying about the numbers and math, why this is happening. Those are all things you're going to learn about as you get into other classes. Right now, it's just like, what's the answer to make it work? Now, eventually, when you let that thing render and finish, remember to have burn-in mapping on save turned on. And then, just like you guys did with the other activity, as long as the image is selected, you can do File, Export File, not Save Session. I know it's so tempting to do that. Export File, choose where you want to save it. I would probably recommend saving it in the Images folder of your project. So maybe like in here under Images, I could, oh wow, I have a lot of other folders in there. It's fine. We'll put it in the Images folder. I'll call this, what did I say here? Environment Day PNG. So environment day, and we make sure the file format is PNG. It defaults to EXR, but we're going to do PNG. Save, and now if I double check, we should notice that it worked. So I'm just going to go to the folder, images, and these are all other folders with other things I've rendered previously, but this guy right here is the PNG file. It's not very clean because I didn't wait for the render to finish, but when you guys do it, if you give it enough time, it'll finish. You'll be good. Oh, yeah, that's actually a pretty good question. You can save these as a preset. Now, these are typically saved in your Maya file, so even if you close out of Maya and then reopen this file, it'll probably look the same. But if you want to save this as a preset for every file, which I think is what you're talking about, so you can always come back to this for no matter what you're working on, you can do that. Presets are at the top. You can say this would be, I think it's export render. They've changed this around a little bit. I know these are import. Yeah, I think it's this guy right here. Export render settings. And I think if I call this, let's call this shading, lighting 1, save. I believe that is now, yeah, it's right there, right? So let's just test it out. Yeah, so I did export here. I just named it shading and lighting 1. So let's mess this up and just see if it works. We'll just do like 1, 2, 3. We're going to say 1 sample here, 500 samples there, because that doesn't make any sense. I just want to see if it changes. So presets, import, user, shading, lighting 1. Oh, it only changed that. That's annoying. Yeah, it's not changing this guy. So the preset doesn't change the bottom part, which is kind of annoying. That might be a bug, but you can just type in 4 and 4 there. You'll get so used to doing this that that's not really going to matter. It'll just become like something you do very quickly. It only takes a couple seconds. All right. So we got that one all set. All right, 657. I still want to go through one of the other more complicated ones with you guys. The sunrise is super simple. It's literally the same thing we just did. It's just a different image, but you're just rotating the light, match the reference, do your high quality render, make the display layer, name your light source, all that fun stuff. So this one's not really any different. This one, though, is a little different. I do want to run through this one really quick. So the main thing that's different with this guy is while we do have a Pixar dome light with a different image, you'll notice there is a second light source. It's a little more complicated. We're trying to match the light's angle to get this lighting. So I'll run through this one with you guys. Okay, I'm going to turn off my display layer. So we're done with this light. We're going to move on to a new one. So let's do this again. Right click on the light source, Pixar dome light. Let's immediately rename it. So underscore night. Okay, I'm going to go over here and really quickly find the night image. Where are you at? There it is. Here's my night. Okay, now with this one, I need to do the Venice Dawn 4K. Okay, let's try that out. So we're going to have the light selected. I'm back here. We're going to load in the image. This time it's Venice Dawn 4K. Open. Okay, here it is. We're just going to close out of all this. I'm not going to worry about any of that stuff yet. This is what it currently looks like. Now, from here, you don't have to rotate the light. So you can do that if you want, but it's really not necessary to do that for this one because the lighting you're getting that's this sort of main light source isn't from this guy. The light that you're seeing in the reference, that's that bright white, that is the other light source we're going to build ourselves manually. The only thing this dome light is doing is producing that kind of faint dark blue color everywhere. So if I render it, just give it a second. So remember, it has to make that .text file. So it's going to look kind of like a weird gray color at first, and then in just a moment, you'll see it click, and then we're going to get some deeper blue tones. Oh, wow. And by deeper blue tones, I mean like Smurf blue. That is really intense. But it's working. Now, it's really blue because back here, it's picking up all this stuff. That's a really saturated color back there. A lot of like water. So I'm not surprised it looks like this. It's a pretty shot, though. Now, to get this to match the shadows, in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the attribute editor. And let's close out the outliner for a moment. I am going to adjust the exposure. Now we didn't have to do this for the other lights. This is the first one where I want you guys to make it darker. So the way exposure works is think of it as every number that you go down or up, like -1 or +1, every time you go up or down one full integer value, you are either halving or doubling the intensity. So if I went to 1, and if you watch the render when I hit enter, it is now twice as bright. If I do 2, it's now twice as bright as it was previously. So every number you go up is double the previous number. Let's go back to 0. 0 is default. Now in this case, it needs to be darker. So I'm going to go the other direction. We're going to go down to -1 and cut the intensity basically in half. This is right around where I probably need it to be. And I understand it's not the same intensity up here, but the shadows, like this stuff down here, is really close. It's going to get brighter when I add the other light source. So just by putting it to -1, I'm already at a pretty good spot. I want to get this other light in here before I make any other adjustments to this light source. And then we can always come back here later if we think we have to change the color or do something to it, but we're probably good. Let's just turn the render off for a second. Okay, what's the other light that we need? Okay, we need to do a Pixar rectangular light, and then we're going to try to get that light angle. So this is where we make our first manual light source. We're not just going to rely on this image to do everything for us. Remember up here when I was showing you guys we had these 2 buttons? This was the dome light. The one to the left is where we make the Pixar rectangular light. So I'm going to click. Okay, so we made it, and you'll see nothing has happened yet. But if I hit W, see there is a light in here. Remember, everything we make in this file always starts inside of here, because that's where the center of the scene is. We're going to move it out. I'm going to hit R, and I wanted to scale it up so you can see what this looks like. This is what the Pixar rectangular light looks like. It's just a kind of like a wireframe shape of like a square with a little render band R in the center. It's not very fancy, but the main thing here is I want you to notice that in the front there's this little stick, like almost like an arrow pointing out the front. This shows you the direction the light is aiming. So it's right now it's blasting back this way. So what I'm going to do is let's just kind of make it a little bit smaller, and I just want to like turn it so it's facing the building. Now, even before I render it, if you just look at the image, you can probably already have a rough guess where the light's coming from. Just looking at the shadows, we know the light is probably coming from like somewhere over here, right? Like somewhere in this area, because I have to cast from like the right, maybe a little higher, down at an angle. So it's somewhere in this area. So I'm just going to kind of move the light with translate where I think it should be, like around here. And I'm going to use E, and we're just going to turn it and just like tilt it down. So I'm aiming towards the scene. Let's hit the R button and just see what's happened. Okay, now it doesn't look like much has changed. There is a light there. We're going to go into the attribute editor because I want you to see the light settings. So just like when you click on a dome light where we loaded in that texture, if you click on the light that we made and moved, this also has its own information: intensity, exposure, color. There's a map. You can see it's basically identical to the dome light. Now, the key with this is we want to make sure we get this bright enough so I can see something, because light has an intensity and light decays. So you know how, like, obviously if you're standing closer to a light source, it's brighter against you. If you're way farther away, it doesn't hit you as much. So light decays. It uses a quadratic decay. It dies off over distance. That's a big reason why we're not seeing it. The light isn't just going to show up automatically, because sometimes we have to crank it up a little bit so it's bright enough to travel and hit these areas. So what we're going to do is, when you go to your light, very quickly come down to advanced. And I talked about this in the video, but go to advanced and just immediately turn on normalize. You guys will see me mention this in the videos. All that does is prevents the size of the light from from affecting the intensity. You don't want that to happen. You want to control the intensity and exposure yourself. I don't want me making the light bigger or smaller, making the light brighter. It's very annoying. So just turn that on. You'll get more of that in the video, but that's really annoying if you don't do that. Once you get that on, we can start cranking this guy up. And there's not really any like secret to it. It's you just start adding numbers until you see something. So let me just go to the number 1 for exposure. Do I see it? No, it's still very dark. Let's go to 10. I'm adding a 0. Now when I go to 10, it's not correct, but you can see something is happening. Let's add another 0. Let's go to 100. Good Lord, we have overshot it. So going to 100 was a terrible idea. But there's nothing wrong with this. Well, we wouldn't turn this in for the final. But I just want you to see that you can overshoot it, and what that's showing you is you're figuring out the range that your number is supposed to be in. It was way closer to 10. 100 is way, way too much. Let's try 20. 20 is still way too much, and 10 was not enough, so let's do 15. So you can see I'm just dialing it back and kind of bouncing back and forth until we get close. So even 15 is too much. Let's do 13. Now we're getting somewhere. So let's move this over a little bit, because I kind of want to see more of that side of the wall. It's a little tricky here to get everything in view. Let's do a crop, and I'm just going to render over the resolution gate. Now what I'm kind of noticing, if I'm going to critique it, is we're starting to get that light on the side, but see how we're not getting the shadow and lighting in the arch? And I don't see the light casting the shadow over here. So what that tells me is my light is probably too close to the wall. It can't get past the archway to hit on the inside right here. So I'm going to watch the render. I'm going to hit W, and I'm going to start pulling the light away from the wall. And look what happens. See, we're starting to get that information. And I'm just going to rotate it. I'm just going to start aiming it towards the scene as I pull that away from the wall. Okay, so if you are seeing the Maya file crash when you're getting into the attribute editor, there's a very important video you may have missed in the previous assignment. I'll show you this real quick. This was back in 3.1. It is okay. So under here, this is the step 7 is decreasing the render band performance. If you haven't done this, I would definitely watch that video and fix these two things right here. I talked about this earlier in the lecture. The one you're running into is step 8, prevent a known crashing issue. You have to open up the hypershade and turn off a couple things in an empty scene, not in your project. Once you turn this off in the hypershade in a completely empty version of Maya, the next time you go into your file, it'll work. So it's a known thing that at least half the class is going to run into. Just check this video out right there, and that should walk you through it. But if it does give you any more issues, hit me up on Discord, and I can talk to you one-on-one about it. Okay, so I've kind of get that there a little bit. It's about right. Yeah, I think what I'm seeing is I want it to be a little farther back, and I think I need to make it brighter because I don't. Yeah, there we go. I'm trying to get more light over here without making that wall right there too bright. It's kind of tricky. So I might need to like even turn it a little bit. And I'm not expecting you guys to get this thing perfect because this is the first time you've had to make any light source like this, but just play around there for a little bit, see how close you can get. We're kind of getting there. I might have to go even a little farther out because I'm trying to reduce how much shadow I'm getting right there, but we're pretty close to where it needs to be. But even at this point right here, it's kind of cool because I can see the light casting through. I'm getting some really cool shadow illumination on like one of my open shutters on the inside. At this point, I would probably like add the light to a display layer and try doing the final render. So in here, there's this. I might want to rename this night as well because they kind of go together. So these two guys are my night lights. So we're going to hold down Control and click on the other one to do both. Make my display layer with those objects. We're going to call this night layer. You can see that turns on and off. Both the lights go away. We'll give it this kind of like a fun blue color. And we would do our final render with that turned on, save it out, and then we'd have our turn in for the night shot. And that's 2 of them right there out of the whole project. So really the only thing that we didn't get to was the sunrise. And then the last one is kind of like the night shot where you're making your own lights. And I just want you to have fun, seeing what you can come up with. I mean, you're definitely more than welcome to use the HDR images. For my renders, I didn't rely on them very much. I was actually having more fun doing like rectangular lights, disc lights, spherical lights, and playing around with those and picking different colors than worrying about getting into like just using HDR images. But you might find some fun combination that you can use both. But there's not really any secret to it. Have fun. You can do multiple images if you want, but just when you're done, save them out, turn them in, label them like environment bonus or environment bonus 1, 2, 3, however how many you decide to do, and then you turn in your file as environment lighting when you're done. So you save the Maya scene as well. So when I grade your project, I look at all the images, compare it to the reference. I open up the file. I check out how it's organized. It helps me figure out like why things might look off if I can go into your scene and click through the lights and figure out like what happened or what worked. But pretty straightforward. I think it'll be a fun activity for you guys to work on. It's definitely better than staring at the gray. I'm sure you guys are so tired of seeing that default Maya gray color and everything. You're finally getting real color and lights. It's a monumental moment for you with Maya. So it'll be cool because this is like the building block, like the first time you've rendered. When you get the shading and lighting too, we're taking all the same stuff we're doing really this week and next week, and then we're just taking it to another level once we start adding like textures and colors and materials. There's all sorts of presets, other softwares that specialize in that. It'll be something that you guys will really like, but we'll start with this first and then get into that in the next class. I think that's it. Thanks, guys, for hanging out. If you have any questions, let me know. Just like every other week, Make sure you take your screenshot of the live session. I will be sending out the recording for this tomorrow morning, Friday morning. You guys can also see the link for that if you check your LMS messages. And then you can just work on the activity over the weekend. But I like grading this one. This will be fun. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you all have a good night. And if I don't talk to you tomorrow or over the weekend, I will see you guys all at the next live session in week 4. It's crazy. We're almost done with the class. All right, guys. I'll talk to you later.